think I just preached half my sermon, so this could get shorter, but you know me. A few years ago in my congregation, we participated in what we just called it for short, a Calvin grant. It's actually, at the time it was called, it might have a different name now, but at the time it was called a Calvin grant for worship renewal. It was a grant program that was offered by the Calvin Institute for Christian Worship that's up in Calvin University. It's one of these many kinds of organizations like the Alban Institute, like the Centers for Congregation, that the Lilly Endowment funds to help us with kind of religious learning in the United States. And I don't need that. We were fortunate to get into this grant process. They only accept 30 congregations to do something to study, like, worship in some way. And the way the program works is this. You have this idea that you want to test out. Maybe you wanted to do something around, we were doing something around communion and what that means to sort of live communion in the church and in the world. We call it extending the table into the world. Not a lot different from our theme starting next week for our stewardship and generosity season about come to the table. So we were processing that, and so when you're accepted into this grant program, you send a team of 2 to Calvin College, and it's like the Olympics of worship, because all the teams that are there, usually there's a church leader of some kind who. Often the pastor, it might be the minister of music or somebody who's involved in worship, and probably a lay person, but everybody kind of loves worship. And then you do lots of worship there for those 3 days that you're there. And then the teams that are finishing their grant, they'll have like a poster session, a little bit like sort of a scientific conference, and you get to see the posters. But these are on how their grant went, and they put together some photos, and those who are coming in can go around and talk to them. And then you'll prepare to do that at the end of your grant for the next cohort that comes in. The other thing that happens is they give you all sorts of resources for worship. And you walk in on day 1, and they have a room probably, maybe as large as this room, maybe not quite as large, full of tables and books of all kind. And you're offered a certain number that you can take as a grantee, and then beyond that you can purchase more, which is a very long way of saying this is where I got this book. It's called Dwelling with Philippians, and if you've been looking at your bulletin covers, you've been noticed that every week that we've been talking about Philippians, we've been calling it Dwelling with Philippians, and then a subtitle that follows after that. This book, Dwelling with Philippians, was actually edited by and put together, compiled by the Calvin College, the Calvin Christian Institute folks, and it is this gorgeous book full of artwork of different kinds related to the theme. It's got commentary on all of the book of Philippians, the whole 4-chapter book. Philippians is not a long book. There's poetry in here. There's hymns that go with it. There's all kinds of ideas about how to process Paul's lovely little letter to the church in Philippi. It's just full of stuff. You can see I've used it a lot. I've got it all marked up. But I'm guessing that the good folks, very good Calvinist folks, up at the Calvin Institute for Christian Worship, who put this lovely book together, probably never anticipated that a pastor would show up in church one Sunday in a pink suit talking about the movie Barbie while dwelling with Philippians. But that is exactly what I'm doing, because I thought that there's really a strong connection here between the Barbie movie and Paul's letter to the Philippians. Now let me make my case. And let me tell you maybe a little bit about why, right? So normally I get to church on a Monday morning, don't rush in. It's Monday, right? Plus I'm just recovering from Sunday. Like today we'll have hunger hike, well there'll be things See what I did there? There'll be things going on after church. It's a busy day. And so I let Rhonda, our church secretary, get the business and busyness of the first thing on Monday morning out of the way. Isn't that big of me? And so usually by the time I've wandered in, she has worked with the counters and made sure that those who have counted our offering have turned in. Larry and Lola have come and they've posted everything, and maybe they've wandered out, maybe they're still here. And so by then things are a little quieter, and I often just plop down and there's a chair right there by the door to her office, and we catch up a little bit. And on this particular Sunday, and it wasn't that long ago, I come in and we're talking about the weekend, and she says, Jean, her husband, Jean and I saw the Barbie movie and we loved it. And I thought to myself, oh, cool. Now my kids had it had been out a few weeks by then. In fact, they had to see it on opening day. But I thought, they're 20-somethings, and they grew up with Barbie. So when they say it's wonderful, I kind of took it with a grain of salt. But when Rhonda tells me how much she loved the movie and how there was this great message, I began to maybe listen a little closer because, I have to be careful here. This was coming from somebody who was a little closer in age to me, a little more mature. And so I thought, maybe I should go see this, right? Because it just looked like this candy-colored mess when I saw the trailers. But she insisted that this, and so I thought, we'll go see it. We'll go see it. Fortunately for me, and for the purposes of this conversation, it just came out on streaming this week, so I did not need to, although I did, miss the opportunity to see it in a 20-foot screen. Now, I will say that I'm a bit of a Barbie aficionado. Remember, I said my kids grew up with Barbie. They literally grew up with Barbie. In the early 2000s, and I don't know if there's any who are kind of in this age range, in the early 2000s, Mattel came out with, they're leveraging all the media, and they came out with a bunch of Barbie movies that were animated, but they were more CGI animation. Let me say something. CGI has come a long way since those movies of the 2000s. They were not great. There was not great animation. They were kind of flat. They were kind of... I will also say to Mattel, I know you had to pick themes that everybody recognized, so we had all those DVDs. We had Barbie as Rapunzel, Barbie as Swan Lake, Barbie as the Princess and the Pauper. She took on 2 roles. Barbie for Fairytopia, The Magic of Pegasus, Mermaidia. We had every one of those DVDs. I went looking for them, and then I realized that, like the scene that's in the movie, that's not a spoiler, we had filled that box with stuff and passed that on to someone else. So not only did we have those movies and the kids sort of watch them, on endless loop, but we owned everything that seemed to be merchandised along with them. We had the Pegasus, we had the horse, we had the house, we had cars, we had clothes, we had doll figures. You couldn't walk through the living room without stepping on a shoe or something else. But they engaged their imagination. They loved playing with those, and so I wasn't surprised when my kids loved this Greta Gerwig movie. Like I told the kids, that movie has earned $1.38 billion as of early September. $1.38 billion. So they must have done something right, I said to myself, right? It can't be that bad for that many people to jump on the Barbie bandwagon, the big pink bandwagon. So when Rhonda proposed that we use this idea for our scarecrow, and don't you love it? There's nothing scarier. I thought, why not? We'll ride the coattail of that lightning. And I really loved all the ways that we can play with the fact that there's nothing in that box, right? We thought maybe we can put a figure in there, we can put her in overalls and put some hay for hair, like a scarecrow. And she's like, no, we don't need anything. Because we can say, there's nothing scarier than being put in a box. This is just a tad bit of a spoiler, but it doesn't ruin the whole movie, right? So Barbie does not want to go back in the box in the movie. And like I said to the kids, I thought that is such a first church thing, right? We're this place where we're not going to put you in a box, where we don't put God in a box, where our faith is not the one size fits all, that we have the capacity. And I thought that is a perfect message for us. But why Philippians? Why? And for me, the first thing was the joy, right? Paul, in this fourth chapter, is essentially summarizing what he said in the previous three. It's all about joy. And I thought, how do we sort of capture something that's really fun and exciting and joyful? And here it was, right there. There were some other things that I thought really worked well with it as well. Because not only does Paul talk about joy and make sure that he emphasizes that. I mean, this is that phrase where we say, rejoice in the Lord always. You guys all remember the junior camp song, it's around. And again, I say rejoice, right? I won't make us sing it. But Paul is so insistent that joy in the Lord is a primary value. But he's also pointing to some of the complexities of the Lord, of the world, even in the midst of that joy in the Lord. And I thought, that really is a first church kind of value. Because Paul is saying, in the midst of kind of whatever you're going through, in the midst of what I'm going through, don't forget, we talked about this several times throughout this Philippians conversation, that Paul is actually imprisoned when he writes this letter. We actually think that he was probably on house arrest. He wasn't in deep dungeon jail. But he was limited. There was, what he couldn't do. He couldn't go anywhere. And so he's writing to this congregation. He's writing letters, maybe because he has all this time on his hands. And I've said this before. I think that Philippians is one of my favorites for this reason, that Paul is probably at his most generous and gentle in this book. And here is really the culmination of that he's saying, just be happy, but remember these important things. He's summarizing all that he has told them in this letter, sort of like a closing argument from the lawyer. Stand firm in the faith, live as a citizen of heaven now, work together to live in harmony with one another, and be joyful. I think those 4 bullet points speak to that complexity, even though he doesn't name it directly, especially that last one before the joy, live in harmony with one another. In fact, he kind of calls a couple of folks out, Euodia and Syntyche. We don't know if there was conflict between these 2 women in the church. Scholars are divided. Reading my commentary from Dwelling with Philippians talks about, as unequivocally, the discord in the church Paul is speaking to. And then I was reading another theologian who said, that's the church has kind of assumed that, but that's really conjecture. There's nothing else beyond that says that. So I can fall into that place as well and saying, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. But look, they're human beings. Whether he was speaking to something that was going on between these 2, or whether there was just a general thing. And we know that Paul certainly addresses disunity in lots of his other letters, foolish Galatians, or his kind of pointed letter to the church in Corinth, where he talks about communion and eating together at the table and saying, some of you folks aren't waiting on others. He takes on disunity. And so maybe that is the commenter that said, we don't know that. Maybe his point was that he doesn't really kind of go straight to the heart with that one, so maybe there really wasn't. But just, it can happen. I know it can happen. I've seen it in Galatia. I've seen it in Corinth. Whatever the case, I actually am less concerned about the unity question and more about the leadership question. Because what he does name, by naming Euodia and Syntyche and Clement, we believe Clement is a man, but that he's named Euodia and Syntyche here, he's named others earlier in the letter, he names others in other places, and that he calls out these women's names. And when we pair this with that recognition of what he says in the greeting in 1:1, he greets the whole community, plus bishops and deacons, leaders of the church. He names those roles. And I think that we can presume with some confidence that these women were leaders of the church. I like that. I like that for a couple of reasons. I like that because that tells us, if everyone says, well, we got to be like the early church. Okay, let's be like the early church. Let's get some women leaders in the church. And I like that because it's something that we've done here. That women have been leaders in this church for a long time. You add not just what Paul suggests there, but you go back to Acts 16 where Peter goes and he heals and he raises from the dead Lydia. And because she was so important to the church that they had to call her back into service. Sorry, not done yet. I think that might have been where Peter sort of got an idea of his job about, he started doing it on earth, then he's going to wait by the pearly gates up in heaven too. I decided who's going to get in and who's not, and I'm kidding. Totally kidding. The early church had women leaders before we sort of fell back into that trap of patriarchy. Who's seen Barbie? Who's seen the movie? Drinking the Kool-Aid of the patriarchy? And that's really why I felt like that movie actually had some of those early Christian themes, that it's Barbie and her leaving Barbie land to go into the real world to deal with some conflict, to run headlong into that system where she finds out that contrary to her belief that women did not have the power that she thought in her naive candy-colored world had fixed everything, that she had to take on. And that this is where I really love, and I want to shout out to those of you. Now you can go to Prime and you can watch it. You've got to pay for it now to rent it, but in a few weeks it'll be free, probably. But I want to say that I like it because it's not this simplistic empowerment story. It doesn't have a neat and tidy solutions. It really takes on with subtlety the complexity of these questions around justice and our current condition, even if it's sprinkled with a healthy dose of candy-colored sugar. And I think both Paul and the Barbie movie remind us that there's joy to be found in the hard work of justice. Paul says, rejoice in the Lord. I'll say it again, rejoice. It's a double emphasis. He's telling the folks while he's in prison to be joyful. And I thought nothing brings a smile to anyone's face like a whole lot of pink. I was mindlessly grabbing a cookie as I was walking by the refreshment table. And we all mindlessly eat, right? And I bit into it, and I was like, oh, that's the flavor of pink. It was one of those wafers, and I didn't even look at it closely. It was a strawberry one. What flavor do if pink tasted like something, what flavor would it be? It would be strawberry. Little reminders of joy all around us. But I want to point to another Barbie parallel. The movie acknowledges the way that Barbie, the doll, has developed, has evolved over the years. They show in the very beginning, sort of in this sort of evolution sequence, a little like, I don't know, the first Barbie, the one with the stripes on the bathing suit and the more of that 50s look. Ruth Handler created her in 1959. I was chatting with Diana this week, and Diana said she actually had that very one with the black stripes, and sure wish she had it now, because that would certainly be a collector. But we acknowledge the way that every generation, every iteration, every new style of Barbie, look at all those there, how they've evolved, how they've, to use a little bit of a different metaphor, pushed the envelope. That Barbie, if you can ascribe intention to a toy, has never been satisfied with what she is. She's always trying to be something more that society is allowing her to be. She's being more than she can be, if I can borrow that from something else, right? None of them were content with maintaining the status quo of the moment. They were trying something new and different and bold, and that's one of the reasons why I think of this place, this church. About the women of First Church, if it's okay if I call you Barbies, right? Whether it was Nola Gentry working to shape the community, Connie Hensley investing in children's ministry, Kitty Decker and her work with global missions. First Church women have always been out making a difference in the real world. Church has not been some isolated place, some Barbie land, but that the work of the world happened in the world, not inside the box. And I think about all the ways that even inside the spaces here, that they did them in new and different ways. I think about those who created programs and administered the church, and especially, last year we celebrated the 50-year Village Nursery School. How 50 years ago it was a cutting-edge concept to do a whole child-centered early education program that wasn't just Christian education. It was a whole child that was open, whether you were a Christian or not. This was about creating children that got to explore their gifts, no matter what their background was, no matter who they were, no matter where their families were from in the world. That was a new thing. That was thinking outside the box. And I think of Sally Gustafson and Lola Huggins and Sally Alkier and Lois Sargent and Carol Moriarty, these women who were so instrumental in taking this idea and running with it so that they could be part of transforming the world. I mean, those who continue to change the world through their investment in education and doing things in different ways. Our own pastor, Denny Frank, who went from somebody who was involved in education to being an ordained minister, and all those who have worked in education, Diana Hoke and Marcia Gaunt, Connie Nicholson, Gail Polis, Dan Dahlgren, and I'm going to get in trouble because there's so many names I'm leaving out. So I'm just saying Barbies, all of you. That is a term of honor, at least it is in this conversation. But I think I'm on safe ground when I say that First Church will always be a church that tries to think outside the box. Because we learn from the movie that it's not just Barbie who does the work, but Barbie has to make peace with her relationship with Ken. And us Kens have work to do too. The patriarchy of the world always wants to put Barbie back in the box. Ken can own some of that in letting go of that patriarchy, and I think that that's our participation. But I look to the Barbies of our community, Barbies who now are those teachers that are in the classrooms now, those who will grow up, maybe some of the ones that were sitting here in front of us, to continue to push the envelope, to break down the box. I'm going to step outside the box for just a moment and just name one more, if you'll indulge me, Barbie. Maybe the first Barbie, and maybe even more. It's not too far away from Philippians. It's still in the New Testament. And I think of the one who actually made the mold and made it to be broken, one that every woman after it will shatter. I think of Luke 1, and I think of Mary. Mary, who was not somebody who should have been that archetypical character anyways. One who was from no account, of no background, and yet God picked her. And so when God picks her, God puts this song in her heart, and she sings it. I even was like looking through my notes as I was like, what did I use in the past and that was important? And I pulled one of the notes out, and as it turned out, it was right there. That very thing that I was singing, a Mary song, and I actually had it as the Magnificat, Luke 1, 46b to 55. It's even on a pink piece of paper. Mary sings the same thing that Barbie is talking about in that silly Greta Gerwig movie, about turning the world upside down. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the lowliest of his servants. Surely now on all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. Barbie will evolve. Barbie will change. God has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their heart. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. This is Mary's song. We call it the Magnificat. It's the text that we read on Gaudete Sunday. You all know what Gaudete Sunday is. It's Latin. It means rejoice. It is the Sunday that is usually the third Sunday of Advent. It is the one where we celebrate, of the 4 Advent themes, love, hope, peace, and joy. It is the one that we celebrate joy. It is the one where we light the third candle. And friends, what color is that candle? Yes, beloveds. It is pink. Amen.